Do you like mazes? Have you ever been in one? What might be hidden at its center? Marcelo and Georgia discovered one. An experience that would forever change their lives. Before churches, before fences, before names carved in stones, there was Hearn. In the forest shadow, he watched with unblinking eyes and antlers that scraped the sky. They say he was born from the first deer hunted by mistake. He cursed humanity to remember that the land does not belong to them. Hearn demands balance. For every harvest, a blood. For every field of corn raised, a heart opened. On the hill where nothing would grow, a maze was planted, not as decoration, but as an altar. There, nobody prays. They only run and bleed. Georgia and Marcelo had been driving for hours down a secondary road in rural Kentucky. Cell signal had disappeared miles back. They were emotionally and physically drained. The trip wasn't exactly an escape, but it was close. A fresh start after a tragedy that had silenced them for months. The farm they rented for a week was called Crowthorne, owned by an eclectic farming collective that, according to its website, followed natural traditions of pagan cultivation. It sounded exotic enough for photographer Georgia, and peaceful enough for Marcelo, who only wanted quiet. Upon arrival, they found an old manor surrounded by wheat fields, a sprawling garden. And at the property's center, something unexpected, a 3-meter-high hedge maze, tangled and dense, as if it had grown on its own. The caretaker, a man named Ezekiel, greeted them with a smile that never reached his eyes. Avoid the maze at night. It's not merely decorative. Georgia found it amusing. Marcelo felt uneasy, but followed his partner's instincts. On their first night, Georgia woke to the sound of snapping branches. She looked out the window and saw figures among the corn stalks, moving silently as if in procession. One carried a lit torch. Another wore what looked like a curved horn hanging from the neck. In the morning, Ezekiel served breakfast as if nothing had happened. We follow the lunar calendar here. Tonight is the blood moon, a time for introspection. Georgia photographed the maze. She sensed something alive in those walls. The branches were damp, as though they sweated. Inside, small red ribbons were tied at corners, charcoal names inscribed on each. On the second day, Marcelo found a partially buried statuette among the crops. It depicted a creature with an animal body and a deer's head, wielding a sickle. At the base, carved in worn letters, Hearn. On the third afternoon, the sky darkened without warning. A gray veil fell over the fields like a heavy curtain. Georgia could not take her eyes off the maze. Something was calling her, not with a voice, but with a silent pull, as when one recalls a place they've never been. She left the porch, crossed the grass. The air felt thick. The maze's branches trembled, though no wind blew. The leaves remained motionless. The maze's center lay hidden like a buried secret. She entered without hesitation. The outside world fell silent. No birds, no insects, no breath apart from her own. The leaf-lined corridors sealed behind each turn. It felt like walking inside a living body. Damp walls, the scent of earth and blood. At intersections, cloth fragments tied to branches, melted candles on stones, small wooden carvings, names etched in soot. Always names, sometimes dates. She tried to retrace her steps, but the paths shifted. From the corner of her eye, shapes appeared, faces hidden among branches, hands made of earth and flesh, hair woven into thorns. With each step, she drifted away from herself. The maze whispered memories that weren't hers. Georgia paused. Ahead lay a circular clearing covered in twisted roots. At its center, a wooden stake wrapped in red ribbons, bones scattered around. Remnants of offerings. Fragments of fabric looked eerily like aged skin. She sank to her knees. A phrase echoed in her mind, vivid, soundless. You are fertile. He has chosen you. When she emerged hours later, she was pale, eyes fixed on something unseen, silent, sleepless. Marcello found her in darkness, staring at the Hearn statuette on the table. The symbol now appeared on the bathroom mirror, carved with something sharp. The next morning, Marcello awoke alone. Georgia was gone, not in bed, kitchen, or fields. On the living room table, the Hearn statuette had been positioned ritualistically, facing the door. At its base lay strands of hair bound with red thread. Plants in the garden were wilted. Leaves drooped. The corn no longer whispered in the breeze. Everything felt like it was holding its breath. Marcello searched the house. In the attic, he discovered a hidden door behind a leaning bookshelf. Beyond it, a staircase descended into the basement. The air smelled out of place. Damp stone, burned wax, rotting roots. At the center of the room stood a wooden chair with arm restraints. Footprints dragged across the floor. On a bench, leather-bound books with indecipherable scripts. In one corner hung a relic filled with dozens of tags on strings, names, dates, genders. On a low shelf lay a handmade diary labeled Judith R. Holloway, 1869. Its pages stained but legible, indented and scribbled with anger. He demands pairs, always pairs. In the maze, always at dusk. Hearn doesn't accept solitude. He demands the reflection of terror in the eyes that feeds him. The hedges grew in 3 nights. No seed, no water. The earth already knew the path. In the last cycle, we chose 2 brothers. The elder ran. The younger was taken. The harvest doubled that year. Those words burned behind Marcello's eyelids. He climbed back upstairs to find a circle of people pacing around the maze. Dozens, soundless, no eyes meeting his. Plain clothes, heads bowed, each wearing the same emblem on their chest, crossed antlers entwined with roots. Georgia stood among them, pale, eyes open but empty. He ran to her. Her body moved like a puppet. Feet carried her, but she did not respond. He tried to pull her back. She collapsed, heavy and stiff, not unconscious, but absent. On the ground near her lay one of the maze's red ribbons, handwritten, Georgia L., 2024. That night, the sky darkened earlier than usual. No stars, no moon. The corridors of the living maze whispered in the wind. Torches lit one by one, though no hands were visible. Ezekiel stood on the porch above, clad in ancient robes to his feet, a crown of bones and moss upon his head. Below, the silent community arranged in a semicircle around the maze entrance. Marcello tried to flee. Others restrained him and dragged both him and Georgia to an altar outside, preparing to guide them into the maze. The ceremony had begun, and Marcello was already part of it. They knelt before the maze, bound by cords of plant fiber. Faces turned to the shadowed entrance. The surrounding air vibrated with voiceless chants, no words spoken. The hedges in front of them split open on their own. From the labyrinth's center, thick smoke began to rise. The scent of burned flesh, damp wood, and ancient blood filled the air. A low, invisible drum pulsed beneath the soil, as if the ground itself possessed a heart. The circle resumed a low, discordant chant, a sound that seemed to emerge from the very bones, vibrating the jaw and invading the ears. The language was not human, a composition of clicks, breaths, and silences. Marcello and Georgia were pushed inside. The opening closed behind them. The maze had changed. Georgia stumbled as though fighting the ground itself. Marcello guided her, but she tripped, whispering disconnected words. Time inside was fluid. Shadows ignored light. Branches formed faces at points. Hands reached from the dirt. Screaming produced no sound. Running felt like standing still. At the central clearing, they found an altar of moss-covered stone. Upon it lay a blade crafted from bone and roots. Around, more red ribbons with names. Many faded, some fresh and wet. The drum stopped. From atop the living walls descended Hearn, towering, impossibly so. His body draped in moss and hide, antlers reaching into the darkened sky. His face was bark, shadow, and ocular voids. Yet there were many eyes, scattered in unnatural places. They spun, focused, dilated. He did not walk. He emerged. Part of the earth, part of the mist. The silence he carried was louder than any scream. Georgia collapsed to her knees, hands over her face, trembling. Marcello moved toward her, attempting to lift her, but she was beyond reach. He saw then that the ritual's requirement was not survival. It was witness. The horror had to remain seen. Sacrifice was not merely death, it was permanence. He grasped the bone blade. The altar recognized him. The blade glowed. A cut, blood spurted. The ground drank it. Smoke dispersed. Georgia screamed as light returned. The hedges shuddered and parted. She fled without looking back. The maze made no attempt to stop her. Behind her remained silence. Marcello stayed on his knees, his blood drained by the blade wielded by Hearn. Georgia never returned home. She moved to another city, assumed another name, another life. She avoided mirrors, rural maps, everything that reminded her of that night. She told herself it had been madness, a hallucination, a shared delusion. It was easier that way. But even in the sunniest days, the labyrinth's shadow followed her. Sometimes she woke smelling damp earth on her skin. Other times she heard branches cracking outside an empty window. Marcello's name was never spoken again. No records, no news, no trace. One morning she awoke with her heart pounding. The mattress beneath was colder than it should be. The walls bore a strange chill. She tried to sit, but her body felt heavy. As her eyes adjusted to dim light, she realized she was not in her apartment. There was no ceiling. Gray sky peered between high hedges. Damp soil coated her palms. None of the familiar surroundings remained. She lay at the labyrinth's center. In her lap, she found the Hearn statuette, eyes carved upward. Her fingers were stained with something dark. On her chest, a necklace of red thread. Beside her, emerging from the living wall, a fresh red ribbon, wet to the touch, bearing a name she recognized instinctively. Still warm with ink, Georgia L-2029, and in front of her, Hearn descending through the hedge. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Share this with your friends who love these kinds of tailies.